Alright, welcome to Open Mic Wrestling Night here on Fill in the Void Podcast Network here by way of Spreaker, exclusively on Fill in the Void Podcast Network here. Thank you all for tuning in on this Saturday, July 14, 2018. Thank you all again so much for tuning in this week for my return last week. And I've had great luck with now getting two big stories in a row for each weekend. Let's see. Obviously, this weekend doesn't need any special introduction of what has gone on. This week is the story of, the big story. Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling combining forces to run the event the night before WrestleMania at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Now, where is the significance in this? Now, before we go any further, I'm going to be discussing this, obviously, but then I'm going to discuss NXT call-up, quote, failures, and a couple other interesting things from WWE, that were just kind of thrown out there today, so I'll get to that in a little bit. If you're listening to me live, you could send whatever comments you have in the chat here if you're listening to Spreaker.com/filling_the_void. Alright, let's get into Ring of Honor and MSG. So, it's a big deal in the world of wrestling for a few reasons. The biggest reason is no wrestling company has run out of MSG other than WWE for the longest time. Vince McMahon Sr. obviously ran out of there. Jesse McMahon has run out of there before him. Vince McMahon, obviously. But it's said so many times in so many places that there hasn't been a significant event in WWE at MSG since probably about 2010, 2011. I don't know for certain offhand, but there really hasn't been a pay-per-view out of MSG in a long time. There certainly hasn't been a Raw or SmackDown that has aired outside of MSG, that has held shows from MSG in a long time, which is disappointing in a way. I'm sure there's things that are involved, like how much money it is to run out of that building, and the cost would obviously be a thing. I don't know what the ownership of MSG has done price-wise for certain acts and everything to not run out of the building, dubbed the world's most famous arena. Running out of there obviously comes at a bigger price tag, but WWE has always done house shows there. They've always made a bigger deal out of running Madison Square Garden. Offhand, I can't quite remember either if they've done a network special from MSG. But obviously, the Garden wanted an event or two, or whatever the case may be, run out of their building WrestleMania weekend. Now, we all know, historically, at least recently, the economic well, it's always been the case, but the economic boom that WrestleMania creates, WrestleMania week that it creates for the area in which they host. Millions upon millions of dollars just from WWE's side alone. But in more recent history, to where I was kind of trying to allude to, but my brain and my mouth aren't necessarily on the right page right now, is the fact that all these independent companies run out of the host city of WrestleMania, or at least in the surrounding area. So there's a lot that goes into running into, all this. So I was listening to an interview that Jeff Koff was conducting, the COO of Ring of Honor, and basically he's talking in regards to how the conversations were brought up, between the Garden and Ring of Honor in running an event there. Then when it was announced that it was going to be the case, WWE filed, basically blocked Ring of Honor from doing a show at MSG. Typical stuff of, I guess, promoters to do that. And it's funny how they try to block a company running out of a building that they probably weren't even considering running out of for WrestleMania weekend, considering they're doing the big show at MetLife Stadium. And I was actually out at a bar on Thursday when I read that this was actually happening. It was like 2 hours after the fact, but I didn't even realize it. And then I saw that it was happening. The Ring of Honor and New Japan co-branded event. And the first reaction that I had seeing the announcement was, holy crap. Because I had been under the impression that they're not even going to do it because of the block. And then they got to figure out what other building they're going to run out of, or what are they going to wind up doing. But obviously that wasn't the case. Something must have happened along the way that the Garden said, no. You're not running out of our building for any of these events. Raw, SmackDown, NXT TakeOver, which TakeOver at the Garden would have been amazing. The New York crowd, where they show up at the Barclays anyway, obviously for TakeOver Brooklyn, whenever they do the SummerSlam weekends there. But the New York crowd always shows up. That's a given. And for NXT TakeOver at the Garden, they would have been out there full force. That would have been a quick sellout, reminiscent of the days of the Attitude Era, where Jim Ross would be hyping up certain events and like, oh, well, this pay-per-view sold out in 15 minutes, or they sold out. And when WrestleManias used to sell out in record time of like an hour or so, probably quicker than that. I can't really reflect off the top of my head, but for the longest time, and I know I had said this last week, it's been WWE, then everybody else. Ever since the acquisition of WCW, it's been WWE versus everybody else. Even when TNA/Impact Wrestling was at its peak, featuring matches with Styles, Joe, and Daniels, and then the acquisition of Kurt Angle and Christian's acquisition, and it definitely there was no close second. Now, and this isn't a thing where it's like, okay, well, I'm not saying that Ring of Honor is going to give WWE a run for its money, as in terms of quote competition. But you have guys like Cody and the Bucks who not only did All In, or they're doing All In September 1st in Chicago, which sold out, in record time. You don't hear of sellouts of other companies that are not WWE. You barely even hear sellouts of WWE. And it's at the point where, okay, you had the internet, you could go on YouTube and find wrestling, and these independent talents are throwing their videos on YouTube, and other companies like Impact, like others, are going on Twitch to broadcast their programming. There's a lot of options for wrestling that's not on the major television market. However, for companies, it's a big plus. Obviously, the story of Fox Sports, or Fox acquiring the WWE for $2 billion over a 5-year deal for the rights to air SmackDown. Networks are seeing that Fox is throwing in that kind of money for programming of pro wrestling. And USA, or NBC Universal, had renewed their deal with WWE, obviously with Raw, among other things. With Ring of Honor going into MSG, does this open the door for more programming opportunities for a company like Ring of Honor? Like, this is a big statement piece. This is a statement piece that, this is where things get interesting from now until April 6, 2019, when this event takes place. Number one, I plan on being there. I know TakeOver's in Brooklyn the same night, which makes things even more interesting, but I would rather go to the Garden to watch that show versus TakeOver in Brooklyn. I mean, the reasons, one, I've been to that area of Brooklyn before. I'm not the biggest fan of that area of Brooklyn.